welcome on behalf of the book fair and on to this program, which is in conjunction with the Kentucky Historical Society here at the Old Capitol. We're glad to see you. It's a lean and mean crowd, but we'll make do. Let me introduce our speakers for this program, which is entitled Haunted Places in Fact and Fiction. Madeleine Roux, on my left, is the author of Asylum and Sanctum. She writes in the young adult field, or at least those two books are. She has also written adult titles, and she can talk more about that in a minute. Thomas Freese has written Eerie Encounters in Everyday Life, and he is a storyteller, an artist, and a writer. Dr. Lynwood Montell is next. Dr. Montell is an internationally known oral historian. He is a pioneer in the use of oral history to collect our heritage and our history, and has written 27 books on the subject. His most current title is Haunted Houses and Family Ghosts in Kentucky. Ben Jeffries on the end there is from Indiana, and he has written his first title, and he's here with his first book, Lost in the Darkness. And he has a good everyday job working in a pharmacy, which he didn't really want me to talk about, but there it is. So without further ado, I'm going to ask these authors to talk about their experiences in researching their subjects, how they found their haunted places, and they'll do that individually. Then we'll have some open-ended questions that they'll all talk about. So Madeleine, you want to get started?
Sure. I did a lot of different types of research. Primarily, I did a lot of combing through online archives. There's a huge wealth of information that's been cataloged now and put online to look at. Especially because I didn't really live in locations at the time where there was a big wealth of actual former asylums to visit. I focused a lot of my research on Massachusetts because the book takes place in New England, and it was a very similar vibe to what I wanted. Massachusetts has a tremendous amount of asylums. It's really quite shocking. And again, a lot of the photographs from those places that are current, so you can see the dilapidated state, but you can also see what it looked like in its heyday. So I did a lot of combing through pictures, and it was not very happy research. It takes you to a pretty dark place. You are looking at real people and trying to fictionalize an account without exploiting their trauma and their tragedies. But probably my favorite find that I ended up using a lot in my book Asylum was these patient cards that you could find and look at. And they were not hugely detailed, but they had the names and the dates of birth and what each patient had been diagnosed with, and then the treatments they were going through. And the thing I found the most chilling was probably they all had these little lines at the bottom that was like, you know, is this treatment working? And it would just be a Y or an N. And it was pretty disturbing how often it was an N. And they would keep trying and trying different treatments and nothing was working. So it was, you know, it's one of those things where you kind of end the day and need some brain candy to sort of cheer yourself up again, to look at a lot of real people who were mistreated and misunderstood. It takes you to a pretty sad state of mind, but it was important because I feel like even though my book takes place in a current setting, I really did want to understand the ins and outs of, you know, how hospitals used to work and, you know, why they were the way they were, and the sorts, not just the patients, but also the kinds of people who worked there and the kinds of work they were doing and sort of the mental toll it was taking on them as well. So yeah, even though my book is fictional and there's also a slight supernatural element to it, a lot of the background was looking at actual hospitals in Massachusetts, and then again, tons and tons of combing through online archives. I never actually went to a haunted asylum. I don't know if I would like to. I think I'm actually a huge scaredy cat in my everyday life, which is ironic because I write horror books, but Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I have the courage to actually go be in one of those. I do have friends who have done visits, and I interviewed some of them, and all of their experiences convinced me that I probably would not be a good candidate to go visit an actual haunted asylum. But yeah, so the background for Brookline, which is the hospital in my book, is all real to an extent. But yeah, I enjoyed the research because it flavors your writing. It really does. It gives it a lot of texture, and it constantly informs what you're doing, even if you're not, setting it in an actual hospital. I have had fans be like, "Where is this place? Where can I go?" And it does not exist, which is probably for the best. But yeah, so that was my experience researching.
Tom?
Well, my first book is Shaker Ghost Stories from Pleasant Hill, Kentucky, and I was a volunteer Shaker singer for 10 years. And as I would go out there and we would do rehearsals and performances, and I would walk the land and go in different buildings, it seemed pretty obvious that there was a feel or a presence to those old places, and that the Shaker spirits, were still, there. And we would sing Shaker songs, original Shaker songs, in the old 1820 meeting house. And I think we just provided a way for the Shaker spirits to kind of come in and be a part of those performances in the modern era. So what I did was I asked permission of Shakertown. I wasn't an employee. I just asked if I could take a tape recorder around. So my research method for the first book was primarily personal interviews. I would sit down with someone with a tape recorder and just simply ask them, what kind of stories do you have from the old Shaker village? And there were a lot of people. I interviewed 60 people, and that was in 1998. So over time, also, I would get familiar with Shaker music, and we would look at the Shaker manuscripts and the Shaker musical style of notation and the journal entries, and we would memorize, the Shaker songs. The Shakers actually wrote 30,000 songs, more songs than any other Christian denomination. And so as we read about the Shakers and you might say their style of worship, where they would be slain in the Spirit, they would speak or pray in tongues, that it really became obvious that there was something very intense and intimate spiritually going on, not only historically at Shakertown, but for those of us that were stepping into the Shaker role, if you will, wearing the reproduction outfit and singing the Shaker songs, or those interpreters or workers that were in some of the old buildings at Shaker Village. So the research was very personal in a way, not only from my experience to learn about the Shakers, but also to hear other people's personal stories. And I did some research online and some in books, and obviously there's a lot of historical information about the Shakers at Shakertown and other locations. They have journals you can read and try to enter into what it feels like to have been a Shaker, back in the late 1700s, 1800s, and into this recent century. So I really enjoyed that primary research, to look in someone's eyes when they talked about an encounter with the Shaker spirit, or to hear the surprise in their voice. And I still have that. I still have these audio cassettes, and they're in a box, and they're in my home. So the research to me seemed very personal, to collect ghost stories. And basically that's what I've done ever since. I've written 9 books of ghost stories, of which 6 are nonfiction and 3 are fiction. And I pretty much keep to the same kind of thing. I'll go do a storytelling at a grade school, and some of the teachers might come up and say, well, we've got, some ghosts here in the school. And I would say, well, tell me about that. Or I might go to a library, and some of the residents of the local county would come up and say, well, we want to tell you about our granddaughter has an invisible friend. Or there's a Civil War ghost down at the cemetery, whatever it is. So I like to collect ghost stories that way, where I meet the people, it's firsthand, because you can go to the archives and you can look up a story. It's a 150-year-old, tale. I saw hang up a holler, and it's all very cute and everything, but you're so many generations removed, it's kind of hard, to get a feel for that story. So those are the kind of the accounts that I get. They're personal stories, they're true stories. Many times in ghost stories we think that it has to be the most haunted places. Like, it's got to be from Waverly or Liberty Hall here in, Frankfort. But I've found that ghosts can appear anytime, anywhere, to anyone. And when I tell kids ghost stories, they agree with me because some children have ghost stories. So some of my interviews are obviously in the presence of the custodial adults, but some of my interviews are with children. The research is actually children's stories of encounters with ghosts. And sometimes part of my research is photographs and drawings. So I have drawings made by children or adults and of whatever it is that they encountered, whether a ghost or a spirit or an angel. And also I have, photographs that I would call spirit photographs, where the photograph is an anomaly. You can't easily explain it away as a bit of dust or a bit of moisture, like an orb from something like that. And so you can see figures, you can see mysterious figures, you can see shapes, you can see what could be an angel. And all these are, once again, dovetailed with personal stories. People have car accidents, and many times there's a figure, a spirit, or an angel that comes and helps that person out in their time of need. So the research that I've done is primary interviews, and then sometimes actually some evidence, whether it's a photograph or a drawing or even physical evidence, where they, have something physical from their family, or maybe an old Civil War sword. So research becomes more than just kind of a dry account, in bits and bytes in an online source, or even, just some ink on a paper, but it becomes real people with real experiences and, in the three-dimensional world where their pleasure or trauma from that encounter is wrapped up, in the very, fiber of who they are. So it's been really an honor to receive people's stories, and I recognize a couple people here in the room that have shared stories. So everywhere I go, I encounter people that have stories. I have a file folder 2 inches thick, not with stories, just names and emails, and I'll never ever keep up. Thank you.
Yes, Dr. Montell.
Well, so far we've had 2 good presentations, but you're in now for the best. Well, I really don't know where to start, but I think I'll start it like this. As I do tell people as I go around the state doing lectures and storytellings, I tell people that I am not interested in the history relative to kings and queens and presidents. I like to write about local life and local people. And to do this, you have to interview the local people who can share their memories with you. And it's so important to me that they can tell you memory stories that go back sometimes 3 and 4 generations back into their family history. And so to me, stories told by the local people are stories that you would never, typically, you would never find them anywhere in formal records, like in court records and all of that. You have to get those from the local people. Now let me tell you a story before I go any further. I was working on my doctoral dissertation at Indiana University back in the early 1960s. And I decided to write my dissertation on a black community in southern Cumberland County, Kentucky. It's known as Coleridge or Zeketown. And so when I got ready to start doing that, I went and talked to 2 or 3 black persons, and each one of them told me, they said, now you must go and see Mrs. Anders, because she knows so much about the history of her people and can tell story after story after story, and they're always true what she says. And so I asked them, I said, well, now where does she live? And they said, well, she lives back about 3 miles away from it's just in a very secluded area. And no neighbors or nothing like that live next to her. And so, but I found out where she lived and in what house, and so I finally found the house in which she lived. I knocked on the door, and she came to the door and gave me a big smile and said, "Hello, what can I do for you?" And I said, "Well, Ms. Anders, I'm working on my doctor's degree at the Indiana University, and I want to write a history about your people." And she looked at me and said, "You're working on a doctor's degree?" I said, "Yes, I am." She says, "Now, are you going to be the kind of doctor that does people some good, or just one of them teacher fellers?" Now, she literally knew the difference now, and here she lived back in the boonies, away from everything, you know. But what I did in my first books is that I actually took what people told me and then wrote a history based on their oral traditional stories. And my book, Don't Go Up Kettle Creek, is it okay if I tell another story? It's called, I wanted to call it Verbal Legacy of the Upper Cumberland, and that's from Carthage, Tennessee up to Burnside, Kentucky. Verbal Legacy of the Upper Cumberland. But the press wanted a cute title. And so there was another story in there that a man had told me. And so I told the press, I said, "Well, use this story if you want to, and you pick a title out of it for the whole book." And so anyway, he was it was John Stone over in Cumberland County, and he was the elderly man then. But he said when the steamboats started operating on the Cumberland River from Burnside to down to Carthage, he said, that's the way you shipped everything. I mean, or you called and had them ship something into you, and then they would come, the boat would come and landing, you know, at your farm or whatever. And so anyway, he said this captain came to me, John Stone, when I was 17 years old, and he asked me, "John, would you like to become my associate or assistant pilot?" And John said, "Well, yes, I guess so. He just let me know what to do and when." And so he said one day we were coming up the river from Nashville, going up to in the Russell County area. And he said, we got up within about 2 miles of Salina. Do you know where Salina, Tennessee is on the Cumberland River? And anyway, he said, we got up within 2 miles of the Cumberland River, of Salina, and the captain called me to his side, and he said, "John, I'm getting tired and sleepy. Would you mind just taking over and steering this ship on up the Cumberland?" And I said, "Well, Captain, I'll do the best I can." And so the captain left then and went and fell asleep. And John Stone, who told the story, he said, when I got up to Salina, Tennessee, that's where the Obie River runs into the Cumberland. And he said, I made a mistake. And I turned right and went up the Obie River and got up there about 1/4 mile and got stuck on a sandbar. And he said that our ship was just shaking all over, trying to get it out, you know. And he said it woke the captain up. And the captain said, "John, what in the world have you done?" And John said, "Well, I didn't mean to do what I did, but I guess I made a mistake." Because I came up the Obie River, I guess. And so the captain took the boat, he got it loose, and took him back down to the Cumberland River. And he said, "Now, John, you take over now, and you pilot this boat again. But now, when you get up there, don't you dare go up Kettle Creek." And so that's how the story of the book, Don't Go Up Kettle Creek. The University Press of Tennessee, they're the ones who published that book. And then, and let me get on then on to some other stories, or the types of stories. And they were tales from Kentucky lawyers, tales from Kentucky doctors, Tales from Kentucky Funeral Directors or Funeral Homes, Tales from Kentucky One-Room School Teachers, and Tales from Kentucky Sheriffs. And what you have to do is, whenever I decided to do this, I would simply, I would simply go to a person, let's say I was doing lawyers to begin with, and I would go to a lawyer and I tell him what I was interested in, and that I needed some stories from him for inclusion in the book. And they would tell stories, and then when I got through, I would say, now, I need to hear from you. Do you have a friend in an adjoining county or even 2 or 3 counties away who could tell me some stories that would be interesting enough to go in the book? And he said, each one would say, yes, I can. I recommend that you go see so-and-so, and he gave me even a telephone number. And then, so whenever I got to them, then they would say, well, so-and-so called me and told me you were coming up. They would help me that much. The person I've interviewed, they would then call the next person I was going to see and would have them ready. And it's amazing how many times people, when I would go in to say, now, I'm so-and-so, and I'm working on a book of Kentucky lawyers or Kentucky sheriffs or whatever, and they would say, you're a college professor and you want to record my stories? And I said, I absolutely do, because your stories are the kind of stories that I want to have ready for my book. And I don't want stories that you read from a formal manual somewhere or a formal document. I want stories that happen to you personally, or that happen to a friend of yours that you can share with me. And they can even be deceased lawyers or judges or funeral directors, whatever. And so, but each one of them, when I would go to them and ask them to call somebody else, they would give me the telephone number. And when I got there, the person would say, are you the one who wants the stories from me? And that's the way they helped me do this. And it was amazing. And even in a book I did called Killings, Folk Justice in the Upper South, people would say, now don't you put my name in the book, because if, in other words, they said, you be sure and change the names of the people and places before when you write that book, because when it's